Morning, everybody. I was working with my son this morning on some maths, and we were doing it on paper, and he got a bit resistant and a bit angry. So we thought, let's try and do something fun with Scratch and sneaky in some maths. Ended up that we made a little game, a little addition game, and I think it was so successful. Vaughan was so chuffed with it that I'd like to share it with you. So I'm going to try and build it. I'll do the same as the previous games that I've been doing incrementally, try and do them bite size, and I hope this helps. So we actually learnt programming as well as doing some fun maths in the end. And Vaughan did his own extension work, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So here we go, we'll build a little maths game in Scratch. Basically it's going to be using some sensing, which is in this part here, and using the ask. So you ask questions, and his questions that he was being asked for maths at his level, he's 8 years old, adding two numbers together from 0 to 10. So that was my basis for this. So I create some variables. So I'm going to say, let's rename this variable, and I'll just put A in there, okay? And I'm going to make a variable, and we'll just make it global as well for all sprites, because we're only going to be doing it with one sprite. And we'll say B for the second variable. Okay. So when the green flag is clicked, we're going to set everything to 0. Drag that in, change that to B. So A equals 0 and B equals 0. And I also used a custom block because I think compartmentalizing things with custom blocks makes things easier to understand. So what is it that we want to do? We want to ask a question. Okay, so I'm going to say ask. Okay. And we'll say okay to that. So define ask. What is it we want to do? We want to make A equal a random number between 1 and 10, not 0 and 10, because sometimes a 0 plus 0 would appear, which would be a bit strange. So in operators, we're going to pick a random number 1 to 10. So A is equal to somewhere between 1 and 10. Okay, and I'm going to duplicate that. So I'm going to right mouse click on set, say duplicate, boop, and then change A to B. So when you ask a question, we're going to set A to equal a random number between 1 and 10, and we're going to set B to equal a random number between 1 and 10. Okay, and then I'm going to ask a question. Okay, the default is what is your name? Now I want to ask what is A plus B, and A and B will be visible as those numbers when they're defined. So you can only ask a string there. So there's a cool thing in operators called join. Where are we? Join. We might need a few of these, because if I put what is, and then in my variables drag A into there, it should be A plus B. Okay, so I'll pull that back out again, and I'm going to get another join. Just take a little bit of time, I think. What is A? And I'll put a plus there. Okay. And I'm going to pull another join in. And then go to variables and put B, question mark. Now we need to join these together as well, so I need another join. So join A plus, and then B question mark. And then I'm going to drag that into there. So it says, what is A plus B question mark. And if I drag that up there, and if I run it, oh, hold on, go to my blocks, and we'll go to drag ask in there. So when the green flag is clicked, set A to equal 0, B to equal 0, and then we'll ask a question. Okay, so in the ask function, we set A to equal a random number between 1 and 10, set B to equal a random number between 1 and 10, and then we're going to ask, what is A plus B? Question mark. And wait. So if I run that, what is 3 plus 10? If I go to my variables, I'll show variable A as well. So A is being defined as 3 and B is defined as 10, and you'll find that what is 3 plus 10? So what is A plus B? Excellent, that's working. There's your answer, space for an answer. We've got no response yet, so that's where we're going to have to start typing our numbers when we run our program. So I'll press stop on that. So what we have to do is we have to take our answer and check to see what that answer is. Okay, so I think it's an if and an else, because it's either correct or incorrect for a simple plus sum. So if something, then do that, else do this. Okay, and what are we checking against? We want to see if something is equal to the answer. So we go back to answer. Okay, now what should the answer be? It should be A plus B. So if we go to operators and drag in the plus and plus, okay, we go back to our variables and drag A and B. So if the random number between 1 and 10 for A and the random number between 1 and 10 for B added together is equal to the answer that you're going to give, then that should be a correct answer, shouldn't it? So how are we going to show that? I'm going to say correct for 2 seconds. And I'm going to duplicate that. Ooh, not correct. Not correct for 2 seconds. So we can simply check if A plus B is equal to the answer that you give. It'll say correct if it is, and it will say, ooh, not correct if it's not. And let's run that. What is 1 plus 5? I think that's 6. Enter. It's correct. Woohoo! Now in my next video, I'll show you how to loop back round, and we'll start keeping a score of how many questions were asked and what is the how many correct answers have you given. But we haven't tested if the failure calculates correctly yet. So what is 9 plus or 10 plus 9? I'm going to say it's 6 again. Press enter. Oh, not correct. So that's working a treat. So we've got the basics for adding two numbers together, checking if those two numbers are the same as the answer that you give, and then depending on that answer, we can say it's correct or incorrect. And as I said, we will then, in the next video, add up a score of how many correct answers you've given, and we'll also keep track of how many questions we've asked. And then after that, Vaughan started saying, could we add more difficult sums? So we then started adding in more complexity, which actually Vaughan loved, and made him sit down and do maths for an extra half an hour. So I think this is very successful. Stick with us and we'll build it. Digital Maker CIC. Cheerio!